make videos about my home. First of all, I completely forgot to film an intro when I was building this because this DIY took from me. But in today's video, I'm going to show you how I transformed a basic looking Ikea Hemnes shoe cabinet into this beauty. Like, it just looks a bit more high end, and honestly, I can't believe I actually did this. I'm going to basically talk you through what I did, the tools I used, and how you can basically upgrade your Ikea Hemnes shoe cabinet into something so fabulous. As always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help my channel, and if you're not subscribed to my channel, please consider subscribing to my channel. And without any further blabbs, let's get on with today's video. So the first thing I did was go to Ikea and pick up my shoe cabinet. I was a bit gutted because they only had the white color. I've been looking for the black brown color for a long time, but that's been out of stock since early 2022, so I had to make do with the white one. So I got the pine strip wood from B&Q. I had this miter box, my previous DIY. I had this manual saw from another DIY, and I also had this tape measure, which I didn't really use. And the first thing I did was basically mark out the angled part of the first edge. Now this looks very dangerous, I know, and I almost didn't put this on, but this was the reality of how I got my cut my pine wood. And I didn't have a miter saw, and I just didn't want to spend money on power tools, so I worked with this, and I was being very careful, but I was also a bit scared I was going to cut myself. Luckily, thank God, I didn't actually cut myself. So I basically just measured the length of the drawer, and I just marked out the parts I needed to cut, and I get very confused with what angle to cut using the miter box. So I basically made my life easier and I just traced it out, so it was a lot easier for me to cut it. And again, more cutting. So the first thing I'd say is cut all your wood so you don't actually have to go through this step again. And if you own a miter saw, lucky, it'll take you half the time. Oh, my knees are so ashy, guys, but DIY is not a glamorous activity. I basically repeated the process. I just cut out all the parts I needed for the frames. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I wanted to frame the drawer first of all before I put the curved pine wood, just because I thought it would look a bit more professional. I thought an angular cut will also look a bit more professional. These were all my cut woods for each drawer. And yeah, I was happy with it, and I was relieved I didn't have to use the chainsaw or the handheld saw again. I basically also just put everything down, just make sure that it was the right fit, and to double check if I needed to amend for any measurement inefficiencies. And I got these clamps from B&Q, some clamps, some sandpaper, and my all trusted Gorilla Glue. I lightly sanded the edges of the wood just to give it a finer finish and make sure that any rough edges were smoothed out. This part was a pain. Then I lightly sanded the drawer to make sure that my glue and my wood would stick properly. So the first thing I did was I basically just put a generous portion of glue on each wood, spread it out with the leftover wood pieces, and I basically stuck it onto the wood. Now this part is very important. You need to clamp it on, otherwise it is not going to stay. So if you don't own a clamp, you need a clamp. That's the only way your wood will stick to your surface. So I just basically used the clamps, and when you're using clamps, there's movement. You need to be careful that you're framing it accordingly, and there's no, like, it's just on a straight line. And I just let that dry for about half an hour, and then I repeated the process until my entire drawer had a wooden frame. as mentioned earlier, once I put the clamp, you can see that the wood was moving, so I just need to double check that it was framing it properly, because if you don't get this step right, it'll be hard for your drawers to actually fit into the shoe cabinet frame. So just be careful that you're double checking that you're happy with the framework before it dries. And yes, there are gaps, but we'll fill that at a later part of this video. But this is what it looked like. Now I got this decorative pine from B&Q, and just to give it a bit more of a high-end look, and I just measured out the length of what I needed to cut, and I cut everything. I think I needed about 11 of these pieces per drawer, so I think I used about 4 or 4.5 pieces in total. Yeah, and I just basically double checked that I was happy with it, and I had to trim a couple more because it didn't fit properly. So I just basically used my Gorilla Glue and my clamp, and I just basically put sanded the edges per usual, and I basically used my Gorilla Glue and I stuck it on. This part was fun. I feel like this part was actually quite straightforward. And just make sure that you're pressing the wood when you're gluing it on or when you're clamping it on, to ensure that there are not many visible spaces, even though you're going to fill up the spaces with caulk when it's done drying. You want to make sure that the spaces are not too large and you can manage what you need to manage. So yeah, that's basically what I did, and I repeated it until every surface was covered in this decorative molding. And the reason I use decorative molding is because I just felt like it gave it a bit more character than just plain wood. But yeah, that was what I did. Now I forgot to film this part, but there was a very little gap there, and I got this really thin strip wood from B&Q, and I cut that, and I just basically stuck it on because I couldn't cut a portion of the decorative molding safely without cutting myself, and health and safety obviously is priority. So I basically filled that in with a molding that looked like it wasn't the exact spec, but you can't tell, and just stuck it on so the gap was covered. Now when I was done with everything, I used my decorator's caulk because I couldn't find the grip fill that I used for a previous DIY, and I basically just caulked any gaps. And this part, I felt very professional when I was doing it, and it looks like I know what I am doing, but let me clear the air. I didn't know what I was doing, but I basically tried to fill as many gaps as I could. Once you basically use the gun, I just used my hand to get into it properly and make sure that all the holes were filled. I don't think this was the best caulk to use. I think the grip fill might have been a better one because it just felt a bit weirder than the other one I used. But this is what I had on hand, and I was being cheap. I didn't buy a brand new one, but this, I did it for all the drawers, and I let that dry. And this is what it looked like when it had dried for a couple of hours, and then it was time for me to sand it. And so I used a sanding block, and I just sanded it lightly. I'm not quite sure I used the right sanding paper, but hey, it worked. So just check it. And now it is time to paint. I settled for a black color because I thought black will hide any imperfections, and it'll just make it easier for me. I used the chalk finish paint by Rust-Oleum, and honestly I would not recommend this paint because it chips so easily. I need to actually get a new paint. I'm actually looking to get the French Chic paint and just top it up because it's just been chipping and it just didn't give me the coverage I was looking for. And once you place something on the shoe cabinet, it just chips away. Chips away. So this paint, honestly, I would not recommend it. And when I checked it after I bought it, it had very terrible reviews, so my fault when actually reading the reviews before I bought it. But this was all I could find in B&Q for furniture in the color I was looking for. But if you want to gamble and use this paint, yeah, you can. I'm not going to link it down below because I do not recommend it. I gave this a couple of coats. I didn't need to prime it because it was wood and it took on very well. But after I dried, I noticed that there were some white caulk bits that just refused to get covered in the paint. So I need to paint it again, but I haven't had the time, and If you're not looking for it, you're not going to see the imperfection, but if you're looking, you will find it. Once my drawers were drying nicely, I thought it was a good time to start building my shoe cabinet frame. A little tip: if you're dating somebody and trying to figure out if you guys are compatible, go to Ikea and get a flat pack furniture and try to build it together. If you're still speaking to each other after you're done building that piece of furniture, then yes, they are the one. Go for it, because building a flat pack will honestly test you. But this was fairly straightforward to build. I did it in about a couple of hours, and I had a couple of hiccups, but nothing I couldn't handle. So all in all, I was happy with it. But I'm not going to talk you through how I built this, because this is not a tutorial on how to build a shoe cabinet. This is a tutorial on how to elevate your shoe cabinet. So I'm going to stop talking now. But yeah, I built this myself. I'm proud. So once I was happy with the frame, it was time to paint. I recommend priming your Ikea furniture before you start painting, just because it's hard for it to actually get paint to stick on it. Otherwise, you're just going to go through so many layers of paint. But first, I used my sugar soap just to clean the surface and get rid of any dust and dirt. And just use a microfiber cloth to give it a wipe. And I'm using a bin bag to protect my floors, just because it was freezing and I couldn't do this DIY outside. But I mixed my primer. I got a very cheapish primer from B&Q, and I just used that on the surface. And I noticed that the parts I primed, when I was painting it, the paint got on very easily, and the parts I didn't prime, it was hard to get the paint to stick. So once I was done priming and it had dried, I think I gave it 2 coats of primer. Used my sugar soap again to give it a clean, and this is the Rebel paints that refused to let me be great. But yeah, I used the Rust-Oleum satin finish, not chalk finish, and I just painted the edges of my shoe cabinet. And as you can see, it is actually sticking to the primer really well. So if you're worried about painting your Ikea furniture, get a good primer or a cheap primer and use that before you start painting your furniture. So I think I gave it 2 or 3 coats of paint, and I was happy. I ignored the inner bits because I knew no one was going to see it, but if you want to paint it, then you're free to do that. And then I got the drawer handles from Amazon. I'm going to link it down below. And I wanted an antique brass, but this is just a gold color. It looked a bit rose gold, but it was fine. So the first thing I did was I measured the center point on my drawer, and I basically measured 3 centimeters, I believe, on each side where the holes or the screws would go into. And I basically used my power drill and I drilled into that. This is actually my first time using that drill, so I was very proud of myself because I was always so scared of that drill, but it worked. I was happy. So this is what this space looked like before. There was a deep freezer there, which we've now moved somewhere else. And guys, I completely forgot to film the rest of this video because I was rushing for a theater show that day. So I do apologize, but this is the finished half the drawers. As you can see, the primer, you can see a bit of the decorative caulk. That paint was not great, but this is what it looks like. And honestly, I'm so happy with it. I was a bit worried that it would be hard for the drawers to function as a result of the wood I added on, but it works absolutely fine, and it holds 2 pairs of adult shoes, which is a decent quantity. Obviously you can't hold all your shoes, it's just for your everyday shoes, but I'm so happy with it. I feel like the drawer pulls just make it look a lot more high end. There is some scratching. This was filmed like a month or 2 months after I made this shoe cabinet, so you can see all the wear and tear. But honestly, I love it so much. And if you're not paying attention to the little details, it does look very, 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 very like nice. So I'm happy. So guys, we've come to the end of today's video. I took you through everything I did to film this, and it took me days. It took me so many days to do this, but I think it was very well worth it. In next video, I'm going to show you how I style this, and I'm also going to be building a frame for this canvas piece here. So if you're not subscribed, you're going to miss out on a lot of content. But as always, thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe to my channel. Enjoy the rest of your weekend or your day, and take care. Bye.